An African victory, the Battle of Adwa. Ladies and gentlemen around the world, we Ethiopians are celebrating the 130th anniversary, the victory of Adwa, the Battle of Adwa. In 2019, the Crown Council of Ethiopia has been written about the Battle of Adwa, and I'll read it to everyone please listening, the history of the Battle of Adwa. The Battle of Adwa, in which Ethiopian forces under Emperor Menelik II united to defeat an invading force of Italian troops. That was one of the most significant turning points in the history of modern Africa. In 1896, when the colonial era was advanced on the African continent, and it noted that Africa was not just there for the taking by European powers. More than this, it marked the entry of Ethiopia into the modern community of nations. Menelik's victory, Menelik II victory over the Italians, caused the other major European states and Italy itself to recognize Ethiopia as a sovereign, independent state of the context of modern statecraft. The actual battle, which took place on March 1st and 2nd, 1896 at Adwa, the principal market town of the north of Ethiopia, had been precipitated by the great rush of the European powers to colonize Africa. Italy and Germany had lagged behind other European powers, most notably France and Britain, in seizing large parcels of continent to colonize. Thus, the Conference of Berlin was convened in 1884 to 1885 to divide up the remainder of Africa among the European powers, anxious to obtain their own African colonies to satisfy their urge for imperial expansion and economic gain. Italy was awarded Ethiopia during the conference. All that remained was for Italian troops to take possession. Significantly, until this time, Ethiopia had been left alone by the European powers. Its coastal littoral was well known to traders, but the hinterland in the highlands was peopled by nations notoriously unwilling to accept and embrace external contact and influence. But the Ethiopian nations had been known in the past to be fractious and divided, and from all accounts, Italian leaders expected to rapid conquest of the individual national leaders. Britain had, in 1868, waged a successful war against Emperor Theodore II. Leading to his death, the Italians, however, failed to recognize that Emperor Menelik II had reshaped Ethiopia since he came to power in 1889, uniting its various kings and leaders and creating the process a substantial army, outnumbering and outperforming the invading Italian professional army of 17,000 to 20,000 men. That the Battle of Adwa is still fresh in the minds of Ethiopians became apparent when, on July 5, 1998, Ethiopian volunteers were cheered of the battle against invading Eritrean forces. As the Reuters reporter noted, residents from the city of Addis Ababa, 265 neighborhood associations danced and sang songs recalling the Battle of Adwa, where Ethiopia defeated the invading Italian army in 1896. With an even less intelligence on which to base its actions, Italian could only draw on the British victory of Magdala and the commonly held European belief of no African forces were match for disciplined and well-equipped European military formations. But much had happened since Magdala and Emperor Theodorus' defeat. Indeed, the British victory had even at that time obscured from General Robert Napier and his officers the sophistication of system which they had just defeated. Victory often breeds contempt in the victory against the uncoached at best breeds unwillingness to learn from the enemy so recently crushed. Apart from the overall political and social aspects of Ethiopia in 1868, Emperor Theodorus had based his defense against British on the Rust-Gold system of recruitment, military structure, and logistical support. The word Rust-Gold is Amharic, which is Emperor Theodorus, he recruits based on this idea. This logistical structure was entrenched in what was commonly called Mesafint Hagar, or Zaman Mesafint, namely the present-day highlands of Eritrea, the region of Tigray, Gondar, Gojam, and Wollo. The rest of Ethiopia was under second type of resource system known as Gibber Maderia system. That means a tax, which formed the basis of fiscal and military organization of Emperor Menelik government. The Rust-Gold system, the tax system, was used not only in Magdala, but also against Egypt and Gundat, 1875, Gura, 1876, Italy at Dogali, and against the Mahdi Sudan at Metemma, 1889. It was in the Battle of Metemma that Emperor Yohannes IV had died. The Battle of Adwa was based mostly on the Geber Maderia system. Ethiopian historian Sergei Tegenu noted that in all these large battles, the background composition of the troops were similar. Emperor Menelik took one of the major failings of the Italian planners of Savoy, Italy, was that they failed to notice fundamental change Ethiopia under Menelik. Emperor Menelik II had transformed the administration of the economy and had greatly improved the tax base of the country. This, in turn, improved dramatically his capability to raise armies and to equip them. The complex tax base meant that the battles fought during the era of the Rust-Gold system were precariously managed affairs, as Sergei Tegenu noted. It is not difficult to see the desperate effort of the kings overcome that fiscal limits of system to fight against external aggression. And Menelik managed this transformation to new economic base in such way as to prepare Ethiopia for the most decisive battle. Emperor Menelik II took immediate steps upon hearing of Italy's plans to annex Ethiopia. He called on September 17, 1895 for national mobilization. And within 2 months, more than 100,000 troops were assembled in the specified areas: Addis Ababa, Warailu, Shenge, and Makale. About 2/3 of these troops were raised through the Geber Maderia system. The emperor himself mobilized some 35,000 troops, commanded by his court officials. His queen, Empress Taitu, also mobilized her own force, some 6,000 men. The imperial army also included troops raised by governors general such as Ras Makonnen, the father of Rastafari Makonnen, Emperor Haile Selassie. Later Emperor Haile Selassie, who commanded some 12,000 troops. The Jazmash Tasemma commanded some 5,000 soldiers. Ras Wolde about 5,000. Ras Bitwedel Mengesha Atakim about 6,000, and so on. Troops of the regional princes numbered about 35,000, and of this, Ras Mengesha of Tigray commanded about 8,000 King Teklaimanot of Gojam about 6,000, Ras Wali Begemdir another 6,000, Wakshum Gwangul of Wag of further 5,000. In all, Menelik shown at left was able to mobilize some 70,000 to 100,000 modern rifles of Adwa. By 1895, he had obtained at least 5 million cartridges. He had spent more than $1 million in 1895 currency, a sum which would have been unthinkable to Emperor Theodore or even Emperor Johannes IV, and this sum did not even include the artillery which Emperor Menelik had secured. This component of force, the corps of gunpowder and shell, was commanded by Bejrond, a treasurer charge of finance and the storehouse of palace, and by the Lich Makwas, who was commander of the royal cavalry. The logistical tale of Adwa campaign from the Ethiopian side was less impressive than the logistical effort for force to support the invading force of 17,000 Italian troops from Europe. Supplemented by local recruits, Italy had already occupied the highlands of Eritrea, and therefore was well placed with forward support of the battle. Moreover, it was aware of the problems which had been challenging Ethiopia and Menelik. Famine and internet scribbling were preoccupying the country, and Menelik was initially unable to mobilize forces to resist Italy's occupation of Eritrea and its expansion into the hinterland. And emboldened, Italy pushed further into Ethiopia, crossing the Merab River and chasing out Ras Mengesha, the ruler of Tigray. Full control of region seemed at hand, and Italian forces settled in for a permanent occupation. The Italian General Baratieri, commander of the occupation force and governor of Eritrean colony, sought and obtained an additional budget of 4 million lire and 10,000 more trained troops. But General Baratieri seemed unaware of Menelik's main strategic imperative, which was wait for the opportunity to confront with infantry and artillery the main Italian force and its supplies, rather than engage in a piecemeal, entailed a process of diplomacy with regional princes and rulers, not only to secure the participation of their individual armies, but also to be able to access their logistical support base. The strategy and tactics employed by Menelik were not only due to Emperor's diplomatic and military skills, but also to the unique doctrines developed by Ethiopia literally over several millennia. Those doctrines were also created in virtual isolation from the military lessons learned by the rest of the world, and reflected Ethiopia's own history and topography. In this sense, then the Ethiopian forces under Menelik did not conform to the expectations of the Italians. As a result, the Battle of Adwa was become a significant case study for military schools for the next century, and almost certainly well into the future. It would not be fair to say that the Italians had failed to study Ethiopian military history, but by basing their perspectives on the different strategies of the Rust-Gould system used by Theodorus and Johannes. They could not comprehend the vastly superior mobilization capabilities of Menelik Gebermaderia system. Thus, when the Italians expected to meet a force above 30,000 Ethiopians, they met instead some 100,000. Having said that, the Gebermaderia system was based on form of recompense to the soldiers, which is involved grants of land and the payment of food, drink, and honey, etc. to the soldiers from tenants working the land. In other words, it was non-monetarized system which provided for the welfare of troops. As a result, it was not system which could be projected for beyond the supporting geography. That Battle of Adwa came in such way that because Emperor Menelik had lured the Italian main force into his own territory, it featured perfectly the criteria of Gebermaderia system. But Menelik, after the stupendous victory of Adwa, could not use the same structure to pursue Italians into Eritrea and throw them entirely to the Red Sea. The result was that, although Ethiopia was, as an empire, saved by the Battle of Adwa, the Italians remained lodged on the periphery. More importantly, the concept of seizing Ethiopia remained in the Italian psyche, so that when fascist Italy once more dreamed of empire in the 1930s, it again embarked upon an attempt to conquer Ethiopia. And in that campaign, even though they met with initial success, it was once again an overreaching of Italian resources, and Italy was thrown not only out of Ethiopian heartland but also out of Eritrea. Thus, less than 50 years after Adwa, Eritrea too was restored to Ethiopia. Ladies and gentlemen, this article read by the former Ethiopian Navy veteran, Mr. Fresenay Gebreyesus. Thank you for listening.